Hello, this is Kyrasis, and in this Blood Death Knight analysis video, I will be providing a quick guide on Blood Death Knights in Mythic Plus for Season 1 of Dragonflight. This video is being released concurrently with my full written guide on the subject, which can be found in the video description below. As such, this video is meant to provide only a quick overview of the main points and recommendations. So, if you are looking for more details, you can either check out the full written guide in the video description, or you can leave a comment here. In any case, we will be reviewing the main things you need to know to quickly get started on playing your Blood Death Knight in Mythic Plus in this first season of Dragonflight, including talent builds, general gearing, trinket selection, and rotational changes that have occurred relative to previous versions of Blood Death Knight. We will begin by going over talent builds. And if you are just looking for a build to get started with, here it is. But I'm also going to go over the different variations available to you as well, starting with the general Death Knight talent tree. First, you can consider swapping between Cold Thirst and Blinding Sleet depending on which is more valuable. Though, if you are convinced neither of these options will be useful for your current dungeon, Permafrost provides value that is not situational. Second, you can swap Enfeeble for Control Undead if you have any plans of using Control Undead. There might be some potential for this in Not Good Offensive, but there are not any good opportunities for using it outside of that one dungeon. Third, you can drop Unholy Endurance for Grip of the Dead or Death's Reach if you feel like you will get a lot of value out of an AoE snare, or a 40-yard Death Grip over the extra defensive value on Lichborn. Though, in Mythic Plus, you'll probably be defaulting to Unholy Endurance a lot of the time for the extra defensive cooldown. Fourth, you have 3 extra talent points that I currently have allocated to Anti-Magic Barrier, Anti-Magic Zone, and Asphyxiate in this baseline build. However, you can move them into other utility options if you believe you can get more value out of the alternative talent selections. I marked some of the more justifiable flexible talent point options with circles, where the teal circles are the options that are currently selected in this baseline build, and the white circles are options that are not currently selected. The value associated with most of these talents is very situational, so you may want to consider swapping these around as the situation demands. Finally, if you are in a dungeon situation where you literally care about nothing else other than being able to kill a single target boss, you can consider swapping Abomination Limb for Soul Reaper. Soul Reaper is very good at single target damage, but pretty much nothing else. So, realistically, this probably isn't going to be an option that sees much, if any, use in Mythic Plus. However, it's still an option, so I feel like it should at least be mentioned here, just in case something like Upper Karazhan shows up again that has an extremely high emphasis on killing specific bosses. As for the Blood talent tree, it doesn't provide quite as many choices as the class tree in Mythic Plus, but it does give you a few. First, the baseline build has 2 extra talent points that you're able to allocate as you wish. Currently, I have these located in Rune Tap and Heartbreaker, but I've marked some of the more justifiable talents you can spend these points on with circles, where, once again, the teal circles are the options I have selected in this baseline build, and the white circles are options to consider that are not currently selected. Most of these options are mitigation focused, but Rune Tap provides a way to significantly increase your defense against burst damage. Gorfine's Grasp would provide another form of AoE crowd control. Bloodworms would improve your priority damage if you wanted something more aggressive, and Bone Storm is technically one of the better AoE options. That being said, I would strongly caution against picking Bone Storm in Mythic Plus for a number of reasons. I'm mostly just listing it out for completeness because someone could make an argument for it, since it is technically the best AoE damage boost among these options. Second, if you happen to be running Gorfine's Grasp and Purgatory, you can justify running Tightening Grasp over Heartrend. This is mostly because Heartrend is such a bad talent, to the point where the minor increased damage and cooldown reduction benefits of Tightening Grasp are arguably better. Third, we have an option to use one of our extra talent points on Ironheart in order to grab Bloodshot instead of Umbilicus Eternus. Bloodshot is a single target oriented damage talent, where Umbilicus Eternus is a multi-target oriented mitigation talent. Under normal circumstances, Umbilicus Eternus is generally more valuable in Mythic Plus. However, if you are either in a high enough key level where the timer becomes an issue, Or if a dungeon becomes like Upper Karazhan, where the only thing that is important is having the ability to kill a dungeon boss, an argument could be made to swap to Bloodshot. Next, let's talk about general gearing. In a nutshell, here is all the information you need to know about general gearing. You obviously want to target tier set bonuses, which are worth item level drops of around 20 and 26 for the 2 and 4-piece bonuses. You want to wear 2 embellished items, whose effects are generally worth at least 7 item levels. You want sockets, which are generally worth at least 7 item levels on jewelry. And you want to target versatility and mastery while avoiding haste and especially critical strike. For 10.0 in particular, item level downgrades are generally not justified on normal armor pieces, but it is justified on jewelry, which I will talk about more soon enough. Now, let me give some more details on each of these subjects. As for the tier set bonuses, they do not alter your gameplay or rotation in any significant fashion, and they do not change how you should be building your character. And, just to reiterate, it can be worth dropping some item levels for these bonuses, but it is not to the extent as the 9.2 tier set bonuses, where they were basically worth an infinite item level drop. So, just make sure you aren't shooting yourself in the foot too much when going for these tier set bonuses. They aren't worth looking for raid pieces for example. Next, we have embellished items, which are crafted items that come with bonus special effects. People aren't too familiar with this system yet, but for now, you only need to know that you can only wear 2 of them, and that they are limited to a maximum item level of 418. That being said, the effects they have are worth the minor loss in item level, even if you have higher item level alternatives. So the remaining question is, which 2 embellished items are the best to use? In Mythic Plus, I am generally recommending the following embellished effects. First, Unstable Frostfire Belt can be your best embellished option if you also happen to have a Seal of Diurnus Chosen, which has a bonus fire damage proc that Blood Death Knights can only really trigger when they are using the Unstable Frostfire Belt. However, without the Seal of Diurnus Chosen ring, this belt is not going to be a stronger option. That leaves us with 2 unconditionally strong embellished effects for Mythic Plus, the first of which is the Allied Chestplate of Generosity. The Allied Chestplate of Generosity provides the strongest secondary stat embellished effect available to us, though most of the bonus is going to our group and not us personally. Granted, crafting an embellished effect in a tier slot early in the season could be risky for those who are also doing progression rating, since it could conflict with your tier set bonus when you don't have all the tier pieces available yet. The second unconditionally strong embellished effect I'm listing here is Elemental Lariat, which provides a solid secondary stat effect with customizable secondary stats, and it's in a convenient item slot. Though, if you do have the fire damage ring available to you, using the chest as your second embellished effect looks marginally better than using the neck, as long as you are valuing the stats that are going to your party members. As for sockets, there's not much to say about them that you don't already know. The only thing worth noting is that a socket is generally worth more than 7 item levels on jewelry, but it is generally not worth a 7 item level drop on armor slots. So, let us move on to secondary stats, where there is more to talk about. With the loss of the 9.2 tier set bonus, our gearing considerations are very similar to what we saw in patch 9.0 and patch 9.1, with only a few minor differences. Most notably, Gloom Ward is buffing the mitigation effectiveness of mastery by 15%, with an additional 20% bonus if you happen to be using Ironheart. Meanwhile, Shattering Bone is a significant source of AoE damage that is not affected by haste, and Blood Plague, which is also not affected by haste, is now a much larger portion of our damage thanks to Coagulopathy. And so, compared to patch 9.1, Mastery is relatively stronger overall, and haste is now relatively weaker, haste being relatively weaker particularly in multiple target situations. So, overall, that's why we are looking at a versatility and mastery season overall. Granted, there are a few things to note with the secondary stat preference. First, this isn't the first time mastery has looked like a stronger secondary stat relative to haste, but even during those times, players still usually picked haste over mastery regardless, and several players who tried out low haste builds have provided feedback that they generally don't like how it feels to play. That being said, this is the strongest mastery has ever looked relative to haste, so it is very hard to make a numerical argument for haste over mastery. Second, it is more important to avoid the worst stats than it is to target your best stats. On jewelry, in particular, it is generally worth around 13 item levels to swap critical strike into versatility or mastery, and 7 item levels to swap crit into haste. Meanwhile, it is also generally worth 7 item levels to swap haste into versatility or mastery on jewelry pieces. Finally, you should try to avoid secondary stat diminishing returns, but that shouldn't be too difficult in Season 1. Swap around your gems and food buffs if you need to, though. For a quick reference, here is a table of secondary stat diminishing return thresholds for Dragonflight. So, unless you start having more than 5,000 of a single secondary stat rating, you should not have much to worry about. So, with general gearing out of the way, the only items left to talk about are the trinkets. I'm going to start off by giving you 2 trinket options that are usable and relatively strong in any situation before talking about 2 trinkets that can be conditionally stronger. And then we will quickly go over some alternatives for what you can do if you don't yet have all gearing options available to you yet. First, we have the Whispering Incarnate icon from Raid. If enough people in your group are using this trinket, it can actually be the best overall option. But even if you are the only one using it, it is a strong enough trinket to unconditionally use. And because it is a versatility stat stick, its benefits are pretty well rounded. As for the second baseline trinket option, we have Windscar Whetstone. To start, don't be fooled by its tooltip because it actually splits damage when used against multiple targets, but is still pretty much the all-around best damage trinket option available to you for use in Mythic Plus content. And because there are no good mitigation trinkets this season, and because the only effective health trinket this season that is decent is conditional, that is enough for Windscar Whetstone to make the cut for one of the strongest general use trinkets. As for the conditional options, we have 2 oddball trinkets. First, we have the Mote of Sanctification, which you can only get by having it traded to you by a healer. This doesn't provide much traditional benefits, but instead gives you a group healing cooldown that can be useful for some dungeons if you aren't being limited by your group's survivability, particularly to AoE mechanics. Ruby Life Pools is a stereotypical dungeon for potentially using this trinket, since a majority of that dungeon involves group AoE damage. Second, we have Burgeoning Seed, which is a pseudo-defensive cooldown trinket that can be used to fill gaps in your defensive uptime. Similar to when you are deciding whether or not to take Rune Tap, you should know whether or not you are in a situation where having more defensive uptime would be useful to you personally, based on how much you are being pressured to use defensive cooldowns. But if you are under enough pressure and can manage the on-use effect well, it can be a competitive trinket. In general, if you are in a situation where either of these trinkets are useful, you can use them in place of either of the previous 2 trinkets. Generally, this would be in place of Windscar Whetstone, unless no one else in your group is using the Spring icon. Assuming you don't have the full selection of trinkets available, you can also consider these alternatives in the order that I'm going to present them. Gift of Radiance is a solid mastery stat stick with a mostly free single target damage on use effect attached to it. Sustaining Alchemist Stone is a purchasable versatility stat stick, though I probably wouldn't recommend spending a spark of ingenuity and gold on a temporary upgrade such as this. Manic Grief Torch is a very single target oriented damage trinket that is kind of clunky in many ways. While it isn't ideal in Mythic Plus, it is still better than a lot of other things. Decoration of Flame is pretty subpar, but it is decent enough to make this listing relative to other trinkets. And if you are really hurting for trinket options, Horn of Valor can be an okay placeholder until you find something better. Anyway, let us now talk about the rotation. While the full rotation can be found in the guide, I'm going to talk about a few key points when it comes to this video, mostly with how the Dragonflight rotation differs from the patch 9.1 rotation for Blood Death Knights. So, to start, that means no funny business with the 9.2 tier set bonuses with extending Dancing Rune Weapon and being really stingy with our runes. With that in mind, first we have Death and Decay. Due to Sanguine Ground, Shattering Bone, and Unholy Ground, we are looking to use Death and Decay whenever Death and Decay isn't active at a moderate priority. So, after your strong cooldowns, high priority death strikes, and Morrowrens are out of the way, Death and Decay is what you will be looking to cast. It's a significant damage increase with little to no downsides at all target counts, and we don't care about waiting for Crimson Scourge procs at this time because our rotational downtime is going to be basically zero this season. Second, we have Tombstone. While we are still interested in the Dancing Rune Weapon cooldown reduction we get from using Tombstone, and we are using it in a similar fashion that we were using it in patch 9.2, just remember that it is now also triggering Shattering Bone 5 times, which does triple damage in Death and Decay. As such, you just want to make sure you are standing in Death and Decay before using Tombstone in addition to the patch 9.2 considerations. Third, we have Empowered Rune Weapon. This ability is both an offensive cooldown and a resource generation cooldown. In general, we will be using this aggressively right after we burn down our resources sufficiently. Otherwise, we will waste a lot of the rune regeneration. As such, you will want to lower your rune resources down to less than 3 runes before using it. Finally, we have Death's Caress. Death's Caress is now a more rune-efficient bone shield generator than Morrowind, but because we have little to no rotational downtime, regular usage of Death's Caress will reduce your cast of other abilities, and it ends up being a net loss. It's still technically a game to use Death's Caress at the very bottom of our priority list while in melee, though it is difficult to do this in real time and the gains are minimal. The most important thing to remember is that Death's Caress is now a very desirable ability to use whenever you can make use of the Bone Shield generation and whenever it isn't competing with another ability for your cast time. So, for example, whenever you are not in melee range of any enemies. So, unlike before, you shouldn't hesitate about casting Death's Caress if you find yourself in a situation where you can't use any other productive abilities. Again, before closing out this video, I just want to reemphasize that this is a quick guide and that the full details are available in the actual written guide, and that I am also available to provide answers to questions in the comments. So, in conclusion, this quick guide video reviewed the general Mythic Plus talent build and variations. A general gearing strategy was provided for how to equip your character, trinket options were quickly reviewed, and important rotational changes were noted. More in-depth explanations, as well as information on other supporting topics, can be found in the full written guide in the video description. If you would like to make it easier for other people to find this content, feel free to upvote this video or subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, if there's anything you would like to see in the future, or if you have any opinions of your own about Blood Death Knights and Mythic Plus, I'd like to hear what you have to say in the comments below. I can usually respond to any question that shows up in the comments. I can also be contacted through Discord, and my information can be found in the video description below. In the meantime, good luck and have fun.